That's the panel now.
That's the
I hope you
panel
weren't
now.
coming for engaging STEM students in the humanities because we had a better idea.
Better idea, yeah. There. That's the ticket they can come back next year on. There we go. Yeah. And now dead silence, crickets. Right.
It's all right. We got like
We had our big
we got
idea.
that way. Now we have the
2 or
big
3
idea.
minutes here.
Yeah, right.
That's it.
Is this going to be on the Twitch stream at all?
I think it's only panels 1 and 2.
1 and 2 room?
that go on
Okay,
the Twitch
cool.
stream, but
Well,
I
I'm
can
glad.
double check that.
I'm glad we're doing the recording then.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
can
Many.
we
Well, this
post
is
it?
This will be recorded multiple ways.
Multiple ways.
Yeah, because that's
Fancy.
recording as well.
Oh.
That'll be on YouTube.
Oh, no kidding.
Unless you choose for it not to be, but I
No,
can't imagine.
it's free.
Yeah.
It seems
Yeah,
cool.
right,
Nice.
yeah.
That's YouTube over there. Yeah, not like live, but like.
Will be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Oh, well, cool. Thank you. Awesome.
Somebody has to.
Was the one thing that I got asked over and over was, where's it gonna be? Where's it gonna be live? Where's it gonna be live? And it's like,
Right.
I don't know.
In this room.
Yes, get your tickets. Get out here.
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah, and by the way, where do we get like the little thingy that says a presenter?
The panelist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
panel.
So that'll be panels each.
the panelist one was, it's the thing that has the word registration over it, but it's not
Yes.
actually registration.
The number of times we get questions about that.
Right.
Okay.
So that's
Okay.
that hallway, like when you turn right at the gazebo and go
Yep.
down, like towards Chesapeake, I think.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
It's that faux registration desk.
Faux registration. Got
But I'll show you. If you
And then these badges were at registration itself.
it. Yes, and
And
I
then
left mine in the room.
this one was in MIVS. And then I just need something for, like, I don't know,
I like your pieces of flair though.
right, like a volunteer or something.
You have to.
There
You
you
have to
go.
collect them. Yeah.
And
You
pieces
got to
of
grow
flair.
your badge.
I do. Okay. I'll work on that. I'll keep mine down here so they can't see how naked it is there.
Thank you. This is for all ages.
Right, we're doing the panel as if your grandmother was present, right? Isn't that how?
I am. Don't let me push you around.
Well, hold on. What kind of lady is your
Well,
grandmother?
I used to run a family-friendly channel, but not anymore. Now we're gonna play Cuphead, and so then swearing's gonna come out. Like, I mean,
She was out of central casting, so.
awesome. That's one thing I remember about last year is just like there would be woos
There are often
walking around.
Especially the
Suddenly the
elevators.
whole group.
The elevator may woo up or woo down.
It is
Good.
2:30.
It is time. Okay. I was trying not to be an obsessive nursing professor who started the minute the clock turned over to 2:30, but we can go ahead and get going. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, folks. Well, we'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome on in. This is the Engaging STEM Students in the Humanities panel. It's nice to see everybody attend, coming on out here in MAGFest. This is my first year as a panelist. I'm pretty excited. So we'll start by just introducing who we are. My name is Nicole Harvey. I'm a professor of nursing at the University of Portland. I'm also a Twitch streamer, retro game collector, and I'm teaching for the first time ever, not a class in the music department, or not a class in the nursing department. I just gave away the whole punchline there, the spoiler. But I am teaching a video game music class. It's the first class of its type at the University of Portland, and we're here today to talk about getting students engaged in humanities-based classes who come from maybe professional disciplines or other things. So I'm joined by my two colleagues, Daniel and Alex. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name is Alex. I serve as one of the department heads of MAGES here at MAGFest. So we are the educational symposium. And so talking about teaching methods is very close to my heart and very close to our organization's mission. Outside of that, though, I was a PhD student for 7 years until I got my PhD. And during those 7 years, I taught extensively in our department on the subjects of socio-technical thinking, which is sort of thinking about what happens when technology escapes from the lab or your office computer and goes out into the real world, and also technology ethics. And that involved a lot of trying to get very technological-minded students to think about softer skills, and that is difficult sometimes, which is one of the reasons why I'm excited to be here talking about this today.
Cool. Go ahead, Daniel.
My name's Daniel Greenburg. I'm a professor of computer game design at George Mason University here in Fairfax, Virginia. I'm also the founder of Winterine Game Studios, which was originally based out of Clifton, Virginia. We're up in Frederick, Maryland now. I have been doing Mages panels since 2016. They found out I was the opera and FF6 guy and brought me in for a panel, and been doing this every year since. Mostly why I'm here is I moved from the computer science department at George Mason over to the game department a little over 10 years ago. And part of that was adjusting the way that computer science students were learning how to make video games, kind of migrating them into a more humanities-focused approach. And that includes, as Alex said, it was a lot of an ethical component, kind of understanding problem solving more from, I don't want to say esoteric really, but from a more comprehensive standpoint, not just you've achieved the technical completion or you've gotten the software to gold, but what does it mean when it's out of your hands and in the real world, and how does it affect people once they have it, in their possession. In addition to those things, I'm also a root beer aficionado, a hockey player, and unrepentant MAGFest junkie. You will have to drag me out of this place kicking and screaming on Sunday night.
I mean, honestly, same, and this is only my second year, but also root beer later. That sounds good. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are going to keep this panel pretty loose, and we're looking for a lot of questions and discussion topics from you all out here in I don't know, we call you the audience. I almost said the classroom. You can see where my brain is today.
It sort of is.
It sort of is, right? But I wanted to start by just sort of giving you a little frame of mind for how we all came together to discuss this topic, and then a true story from when I first started teaching. So basically, if you do a quick Google search that says humanities engagement declining or something to that nature, you're going to get a smattering of articles right away, right, that say students don't value the humanities and enrollment in the humanities is dropping and various things like that. But they don't give you any practical, immediately today you can walk out of here with it a solution, right? It's just like, this is a bummer and we are all concerned about it, right? And as a nursing professor, I often hear from students that what they want to come to class for is they want to come to my pathophysiology class. They want to come to my pharmacology class. Those are the things that make them feel like nurses and like students and like they're getting their money's worth. And that's what their parents say to me too. But as an academic, I know that the big value that came from my education, what set me up to be a good teacher today and to be able to drive great engagement with my students was my humanities discipline. You can't be a nurse and study physiology and pharmacology without an ethics background. My undergraduate research course taught me how to read papers so I could read and I could go, well, that looks like fake news, right? That sort of emphasis in the humanities is at the core of the liberal arts institution that I teach from. But it's hard, often we find, me and the other nursing professors, and I'm betting that you two have some other sort of similar experiences, it's hard to find that, how do I make that student feel like they're getting a meaningful experience now, today, in the classroom? I'll admit, as an 18-year-old, the classes that made me feel like this is what I'm here to do was the ones where I got to do technical nursing things, right? Or memorize hard, difficult information. But I left my undergraduate education knowing that the biggest value I got wasn't memorizing drugs in a book or how the bones and muscles of the skeleton all fit together. But it really was that information on how do I make an ethical, moral decision? How do I combat like burnout in healthcare? What do I do when I feel moral distress? And then what are sort of the other valuable pieces around that humanities education? My degree in music actually taught me to be a teacher. I never learned that in graduate school. They just said, go teach class today, right? And I was like, okay, and kind of showed up and did it. So really that's kind of the foundation, is that we're bringing together these ideas of how do we help students make meaning in the classroom, engaged in their humanities disciplines, and really see the value of that today, whether they're K through 12, college, grad school, and beyond. So from there, I just wanted to mention kind of how I first started out. So in nursing as a profession, there aren't a lot of academics that are in like their late 20s and early 30s. And I started at about 25, going back to school to get my graduate degree. And my first class I taught, I was in grad school, it was a research class, and it met in the summer, and the students in the room were the same age as me. And I walked in, and I did my best that semester, pretty much had no guidance. And on my student evaluations at the end of the term, more than one student mentioned that they felt I was more interested in my graduate school than in teaching their class. And that was like a knife to the heart, because I was so determined to make a good class. But for some reason, I just wasn't pulling it off, right? Something was going on in the student experience that was just, it wasn't ringing for them. So from there, I realized I needed to address that before I taught class again in the fall. And I was going to be teaching a variety of new classes, so I needed to think about that. And what it came back to is, again, some of the lessons I learned as a music student. Always be who you are, and don't try to be somebody else. My colleagues in the nursing department were 20 plus years older than me. I was by far the youngest. And lots of them were master's prepared and DNPs, which is like a different type of graduate degree, and I was in PhD school, so my experience was very different. So I was trying to emulate folks whose authentic experience just wasn't the same as mine. I showed up dressed most days in brown, wore like very muted makeup, and as you can see, I don't really wear much brown. And nothing wrong with brown. I think brown's great. But I like to show up with rainbow glasses and unicorn mermaids, and all sorts of stuff. Like, I'm a bright, loud kind of person. And I'm silly. So I tried to be super serious. This is serious research class. And that just did not ring for anybody. They hated it, right? So instead, I shifted and I said, who really am I at the core? Trying not to be these other folks, right? But show up really is me. So I wore my video game kind of stuff, right? I wore my bright colors. I wore my Tetris t-shirts, and just relaxed. The next thing I did was bring humor in. That was really the big one. Bring humor in, because I naturally am just kind of a goof. And it can be the most serious, dry topic ever, but I'm probably going to have a joke about it. So one that I did that sticks out is I made we had to teach like research citations and grammar, and it was very rudimentary because students hadn't had a grammar brush up since they were in high school. And it was things like, well, how do you use the Oxford comma? So I don't know if you've all heard this meme, but there's one that was like the standard comma, the Oxford comma, the William Shatner comma, and the Christopher Walken comma. And that just little silly things like that to kind of get folks to understand who I was. It wasn't about the jokes. It was about just being natural and relaxed and having a little bit of fun. The other thing I did for that class that really stuck with me is the students felt that I wasn't focused really on them and their learning, that I was trying to push them to go to graduate school, which wasn't my intent. That wasn't what I was trying to pull off. So instead what I did was think about a class structure that was really student-based and student-led, and how would I bring that together? So what I started out with was a smattering of a bunch of different lectures, and the first half of the class was like lecture, tons of upfront homework, and then a project here and a bigger assignment there, and it was just confusing and it was a mess. So what I learned from all of that was you have to have a consistent structure to drive engagement. It sounds maybe so obvious, but having a 15 or 16-week semester class and having a consistent week-to-week frame and setup, even so it visually in your LMS or in your course plan, wherever students go to look at what they're doing for the week, even having that just look the same, that consistency and structure and what to expect really drives engagement. And so my students knew that every week we would have one reading after class. I don't believe in reading before class. We'll talk about that later tonight at my Teaching Music to Non-Musicians lecture. I had one homework assignment due every 2 weeks, so it was every other week, so they could put that neatly in their calendar. And I had a midterm and a final, because it was a research class and it was required, right? And every week, the lecture structure started with what had we done the last week, what are we doing this week, and where are we going next week? So every week they knew what to expect, even though the topics or guest lectures were different. So anyway, those are sort of my approaches to getting students in class consistently engaged, consistently paying attention. When I translated this to my video game music class, the first thing I did was one additional piece. I used those frameworks before, but I used one additional piece. And it was to find out where the students were at in their music or game knowledge. First time I taught this class, we were applying to put it in the core curriculum to be offered every year, so it was a one-time offering. And the students were ages 18, first year or freshman year, all the way through graduating seniors. They were a variety of disciplines, a variety of majors, and a variety of sort of levels of knowledge of music. We only had 2 that read music in the class, and most of them were of a STEM-based discipline, and none of them had ever used music technology software before, which was interesting, so no DAWs or anything like that. And one student in the class in the student survey said, and I don't really play video games. And I went, okay, tell me more about that. By the end of class, that one student discovered that RPGs were her favorite thing ever and was playing through Sea of Stars. So it was a good experience. So yeah. So anyway, so that's kind of my piece and where I'm from. Let's see here. Alex, would you like to talk a little bit next?
Sure,
Cool.
yeah. So many thoughts as you were going through that. Some very similar experiences, some very different. In the very first class I ever taught, I must have looked younger than most of the students. I mean, it was bad. Like, I needed facial hair stat, and it just, it wasn't there yet. And I remember there was like a lull in the discussion at some point, and one of the students up front was just like, hey, do you work out? And I knew at that point I'd lost the class. Like, that was just doomed. But, I kept at it and got a little better. One of the strengths, I think, that you can bring to a classroom is interactivity. And I know technically you're not all a classroom, but we are all here to learn together. So if I might be able to throw it back out to all of you for a moment, it would be useful to me, at least, to have a sense of your background. So if you're good with it,
yeah.
Can I maybe get a quick hand raise of who's like actively an educator or like in kind of a teaching field or something like that? Okay, so a very good number of you.
Nice.
Who is like just kind of interested in learning about learning? Pedagogy, right, is the formal term, but it doesn't have to be that. Okay, awesome. And then anyone in the wrong room and like kind of nervous. You have permission to leave now. That's okay.
We don't require bathroom passes.
Awesome. So we've got a mixture. That's good. Because for me, yeah, I had to kind of find my own look. It turns out it was the same type of like smart vest and dress pants getup that Gareth Southgate, the England football coach, wore. Because when I started teaching, it was the World Cup, and my mother's side family is from England, and so I kind of have to root for them, even though we never win. But that's okay. Thank you for your sympathy. So, I put that on, and that helped, but I often found that kind of bringing myself down off of the pedestal, right? Like up on this stage, I was one of them. I was a peer, right? I was learning along with my students. I accepted that it was okay to make mistakes, to not act like I had to know everything, because I don't. I was never going to. And students are not like empty vessels, right? They come in with lived experience, and they come in with a lot of knowledge already. And it could be knowledge that you don't have. So one of the courses that I helped design when I was at Indiana University was this introduction to socio-technical thinking, which once again is trying to get students who are learning how to make apps, who are learning how to code, who are learning how to build systems, to have a sense of the broader structures and networks and systems that their little system will go and embed itself in, right, when they leave the program. And what I found working with them was that sometimes they just knew their system better than me, and that was okay. So we had a series talking about technology ethics and facial recognition systems. We were talking about Project Greenlight in Detroit, if anyone's familiar, right? Automated camera system, supposedly meant to reduce crime. I'll just kind of shrug and like wiggle because it's complicated, right? And we had a student who said, actually, I live in Detroit, and the way you're talking about the cameras in these neighborhoods is wrong. That's not how people look at them, right? That's not how like we interact with them as like a technological facet of our day-to-day lives. And so I said, you know what, that's great, thank you. Would you be willing to share your experience? And so not only, were they empowered to kind of be the teacher for like 5-10 minutes, but then I changed all of the content around it every year since then, right? So it's not about coming in and saying, I know best because I have this degree or like, I have this experience. It's saying, I know I can think critically about this. I'd like to help you to think critically about this. But if you disagree or if you know differently, bring that experience and like we can learn about it together.
I think that makes a lot of sense, especially I heard two things, the revamping and then listening to what the students want or are interested in. And that can be sort of daunting, I think, especially as a new teacher or if you're working in a new environment where you're teaching, whether it's classroom, academia, or in your profession. This idea of how do we sort of capture student knowledge but keep it low stakes and authentic. So it's old school, but I bring 3x5 note cards. And I just pass them out, and on one side you have them write one thing you really liked today and maybe one thing that didn't go so well on the flip side, and then I just read them and I talk about them the next class. It's very old school, right? That's basic. There's fancy ways you can do it with anonymous surveys, but I always find that even with our technology advanced students nowadays, it's just daunting to have to go into a thing and click a thing and do a thing. If I just hand you a quick scrap of paper and say, thanks so much, when you hand it back to me, it's a lot faster and easier. Works for me.
Yeah, I missed that a little bit. I have been teaching remotely since 2020 because things happened in 2020.
Yeah.
And when they were supposedly done happening, they're like, why don't you just stay home anyway? So I've been doing that since, and that does complicate a lot of this, right? The ability to build that connection with students and try to bridge that when you have this digital divide between what you're doing. Like we tried 90s style BBS forums actually surprisingly worked better than I thought they were going to because they were engagement discussion, but they were post by post and they were organized and threaded in a way that, social media doesn't thread these things or occupy that same space. Requiring that interactivity between the students in some way, shape, or form. We have reflections in my Game 210 class where they get topics. So it's like sort of, Linda Richmond, talk amongst yourselves. They get their topic and they start talking back and forth, and they have these threads that kind of spiral, the discussions that go into wild tangents, and they need that because it's the ability to collaborate on thought that then leads them to be able to do things like group projects or think, expand their thinking on something. And that's, I think, for me, staying on the engaged in the humanities part, the hardest thing I have to do is take a lot of students who are very used to approaching technical problems and finding technical solutions and learning to make the thing. And that's awesome. Learning to make the thing is critically important. It's a large part of why you're there. We're always in a fight at the university level. Is like, are we teaching people to, in my case, game design, are we teaching them to use Unity and Unreal and go get a job in the industry, or are we teaching them more of a 4-year full academic, they walk out with more well-rounded education and they can help their communities and change the world. And unfortunately, the truth is we always have to find some sort of resting ground in between those two extremes. But one of the things we really have to do, and it's my background is going from computer science to game design, was throw the word applied in. And a lot of times the word applied has not a negative connotation, but it gets dismissed a little bit, like computer science versus applied computer science. And the hard CS students would look down at the applied CS, in a way. But the key is, how do you then change your world, your environment? How do you do something with the skills that you are acquiring, or the skills that you have done? There was no ethics class when I started in that major. There still isn't, but you better believe my course has an ethics component in it now. We talk about, you mentioned mobile game development. When we get to the marketing section of basic game design, one of the things that comes up is, who here has heard of whales, sharks, and minnows with discussion, right? And I know we have some life sciences people in here, but we're talking about humans there, and I give it a minute or two to pause and say, now we can slowly roll that into a discussion of, do you at least understand that if you are being a mobile app developer who's monetizing it using the more common monetization structures, that 90+% of your income, individual or company-wise, is coming from fewer than 10% of your players, and some of them are buying things to excess and potentially damaging consequences for them, right? And you have to understand that ethical component that comes with it. You can still do it, right? We had, I won't say who, but we had a company come in that wanted to develop a series of mobile apps for senior citizens, Cribbage, Bridge, Canasta, on mobile devices. And it was a very ingenious design that they had come up with. It was you slide cards, use the advantages of the tablet and large screens to do it. No language like multiplayer lobby or login. The design documents said you can't use any technical game terms. And when they mean technical game terms, they don't like words like controller or they were leery about player, but they were okay with the word player. You know, they wanted it to be entirely intuitive for people who only had familiarity of sitting down in a senior center and playing a card game to be able to play this. But that mobile app would track your competency with things like tapping and swiping and pinching and skewing. It tracked where it was being used at all times. Do you tend to lift the device or set it back down? Maybe you have mobility issues in your arms. Do you stay in the same spot all the time? Maybe you have mobility issues in your legs. And that would affect, maybe we should market wheelchairs to them or mobility devices, or maybe we should do things like, give them, like, in the amount of data and the depth and complexity of the data they were tracking on that app was astounding. It was a $5+ million contract, and we turned it down.
Wow.
Because the sheer width of user data that they were basically planning on monetizing was it was astounding. And I'm sure they found a client. I'm sure they found somebody to do it. But at the university level, we weren't going to do it. And that's something that if all you know how to do is make apps, sure, you studied how to reach the API, can contact the accelerometer and serialize that data and build the JSON and design a web service to push that out, and some remote server can pick that up and put it into an analytics engine and process that data and make it available in a custom report for whatever marketing departments you want to sell that to for monthly access or however much a month. Like, the technical skills are all there. But do you, as the person who's learning to be a designer of video games, understand the ecosystem that you are introducing this piece of software to?
Right.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. I think with that, I want to know what questions you all have brought today, whether it's around teaching, whether it's around game design, around history and technology, ethics. Who I'm going to ask the audience to be brave here. I know I'm not supposed to do this so much in the classroom anymore. My students hate it when I call upon them. So if anybody has any questions for us, otherwise we'll just keep discussing and talking and sharing stories. But yeah, anybody out here have any questions for us? Let's hear it. Go ahead.
So I'm trying to help my high school kids make a game in Unity, whether it's
Nice.
Something simple, well, hopefully something simple. How do you help give them some direction on coming up with an idea, or what kind of parameters would be good to set to help them just get started?
Cool.
I can jump this to start.
Cool.
I'm a huge advocate of, even though they are on schedules and they can sometimes feel more restrictive or more intimidating because a lot of people are involved in them, game jams are huge. A lot of the students I know, especially at the high school and undergraduate levels, get the confidence to be able to make games by being forced to make a game in 48 hours or 72 hours because it constrains the scope. It constrains like how much you can do or get away with. It forces you to collaborate with other people, which means you really focus on the skill or two skills that you have or want to develop. And it also is a bit of an idea engine because a lot of them will come out with themes or modifiers or specific things they want you to build a game around. Like Global Game Jam a few years ago used Ouroboros, like the snake eating itself, is like their icon for the year. So the team that I was on made a really simple little Mario-style platformer that allowed you to loop around the world in any direction, and it was a little snake protagonist. And we didn't have to think too hard about it because 90% of that, the paralysis was taking it out for us. And especially with younger students, there's the challenge of the game they want to make or the game they can make, and they're almost never the same thing. A lot of aspiring game developers have a golden baby, It is this beautiful game idea that they want to develop, and they're working their skills up towards being able to do it, but they want to work on that thing, but they can't work on the thing because it's not going to meet up to the standards that they, as a consumer or someone who appreciates or understands video games, can't execute on their vision at the level that they want that to be at. We used to, the old style was to either say, you need to abandon this idea, or you need to, just iterate through it, and kind of get out of the way so you can move on to other things. I hate the analogy, but there are books that will say kill the baby is literally like the way they describe it in these design books. I am personally much more a fan of the James Cameron method. He realized at a certain point that he could not produce the film that he wanted to produce. It was Avatar. When he was much, much younger, because he wrote it in high school. And he was like, I can't do this. Like, I have these grand, insane visions for this, so I'm going to shrink wrap this, put it up on a shelf. I think it was like, many, many, many years later, because he went through the Terminator franchise and Titanic and a bunch of other things before he was finally like, okay, now I have this media, background and empire, and I can make $100 million movie or however. So they take it down off the shelf, unwrap it. Now I'm ready to do this. Yeah. That he was willing to set that aside temporarily so that it did not give him the paralysis to prevent him from iterating on other stuff. And those iterations are key. It's that 10,000 hours to mastery has to start with, the inertia of getting the first game. And something like a game jam can get you a game in 48 or 72 hours and have people help push you along and have themes help push you along and just get the first couple ones done, because then it gets easier. Then you get comfortable with using, whether they're going to stay in the same engine like Unity and keep working in there, or they understand the game loop and the basic thing now, and they maybe they get interested or excited in a game that someone else at their jam site made, and they hop over to an engine like Godot, or they get interested in a different type of narrative construct, and they spend a few months making different stories entwine, whatever they bridge to. The key is now you've gone from wanting to make games to making games. And that first step is always the trickiest one to get over. So I'd say don't let the technology, especially because Unity can be very daunting on the outset. Don't let that tech stop them from doing the iteration. But if it is a Unity course specifically, I can't recommend that enough. I think Ludum Dare isn't happening this year, or the guy who's running it isn't running it this year because he's got life stuff going on, so they may be doing a scaled down version of it or a different version of it. But that one runs more throughout, whereas things like Global Game Jam tend to be once a year, and I think right around this time of year or just previously. So that one's probably not coming up for a while yet.
So from my perspective, I don't work in Unity and I don't game design and program, but what I do is help students create proposals and then take that proposal to like drafting and then final project, right? So depending on the age or the level of the students, so with me working in college, the 18-year-olds particularly, they benefit from me breaking those steps down. So instead of it being one large, it's due at this date for them, which perhaps I would do with my senior nursing students when it's their symposium project or whatever. I break it into little pieces where they have to touch base with me. So the biggest challenge is going to be how much energy and time do you have to put into it for them to get something out of it. I know as teachers, it's not always the 80-20 method. Sometimes it's me doing the 80 instead of them doing the 80. But what I like to do is give them the first piece and say, what's your idea that you'd like to bring forth to the next step? Mm-hmm. So that's my first assignment in the structure. And then from that, I can read through it and I can either give them feedback in class. That kind of saves me some time if I'm managing large classes or lots of grading. Or I can make it, okay, here's your first page you're going to turn in, your second page, etc. And so that would be my recommendation, is to break it down into the concrete steps, but within each step, they get options. Another thing that might be to the benefit is just to get them started making something is the first one they all make basically the same thing. I don't know exactly what that would look like in game programming, but that's something that we also use just in general in the classroom, is that the first one, y'all do it together, sort of the demo, the draft, and then the next one, you follow the same set of steps you just learned, and you make your own. So there's a couple ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, ditto. So we didn't do game design ourselves, but going off of what Nicole just said, I think my advice would be to just kind of remove the need to make the game from that first step entirely. So the assignment is not, okay, make a game, and then, well, what do I want to do? I don't know, like I've got to make a game. Actually think about just what are you interested in? What would you want to share with people? What do you want to like, teach people maybe? And it's like, well, I really like dinosaurs. Okay, now bring the game part back in. Like, how might you go about that? Do you want to make a game about fossils? Do you want to make a game, where you are sort of exploring a particular period of, prehistoric time? But yeah, if people are having like writer's block, but for games, I think personally I would, be benefited by just thinking about broadly what interests me and then kind of bring the game in as the medium to kind of pursue, which switches up the motivation, right, for the students. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but that would be my thought.
There's one other thing I'm going to mention, because a lot of this has been teaching the humanities to STEM students, but at least in my experience, because we are in the College of Visual and Performing Arts at GMU, we have both. We also have we have the artistic students, and how do they pick up some of the STEM things? And so one of the great bridge things that we have is documentation. So learning how to pitch, do presentations, write game design documents, write beat charts, all of the paper side that goes into it, paper prototypes especially, and encouraging like, hey, pencil, paper, sketch out your idea. If it doesn't look right, erase it, sketch it again. Getting iteration and that collaborative effort by removing the technical barrier entirely, because one, these are documents they're going to have to learn to produce if they get into this industry anyway, or be familiar with their use and their function and how those documents interoperate. But also it levels the playing field for everybody, right? The hardest thing we ask them to do maybe is use Excel at one point, which, to be fair, not the easiest thing in the world, but it brings everybody down to, okay, now we're just thinking about what you want people to be doing. And so if you want to talk about the mechanic for how they're going to jump over this chasm, literally draw a stick figure, put an arrow over it, put a little line in the gap, and it's like the goal is to get over this. If you are documenting your game at that low level, and everyone can get involved in that, then they can work on kind of shaping all the ideas together before you ever sit down in front of the engine and actually start trying to do proof of concept for whatever particular mechanic or game genre that you're trying to build for that point.
Makes a lot of sense. Awesome. All right, who else has a question for us? I saw a hand in the back there. Go ahead.
I had two professors last semester that really talked about interdisciplinary fields. One is she was an in-bird zoology professor, and she really talked about political issues within the science field.
Yes.
And then I had an epidemiology course, and she talked about how public health is very important and working together with the socio-political. So I was wondering if you think that can have an impact. I definitely have had professors, generally slightly older professors, kind of talk down on humanities and say that they're not as important as STEM majors.
Right. Yes, so go ahead.
So I'll start with this because you probably saw us like cringe a little bit on stage when you said that. It's not like we all know someone like that perspective, but it is true that there's a history to this, and there are like these dominant, not really true, but like sort of perceived extant hierarchies of different fields and what is a hard science and what is a soft science and what isn't a science, when at the end of the day they all sort of need each other. But I'll say practically, like, even though there are faculty who do that, who will hopefully retire soon, when our employers would come to us and they'd talk to us, because they recruit our students in batches every year, when they would come and talk to us and give us feedback, and we'd ask, okay, what are some skills that our students are excelling at? What are some students that consistently some skills that you want our students to consistently have that they don't have? It wasn't like how to code Python. Like, our students know how to do that, and honestly, a lot of the companies have their own proprietary coding system that they're going to have to teach them anyways because they're not using like an out-of-the-box coding language. But what they consistently told us was it's actually soft skills. It's actually the ability to write concisely, coherently, to communicate ideas to people, to like understand where their department, where their role fits into our larger organization, right? These are the, the sort of like soft skills, right? And I'm using the air quotes because even now, right, the culture is kind of like weighing down on me. But like these are the skills that employers consistently tell us, this is what we actually need, despite the, the dominant narrative and perpetuated by some of these faculty might have been interacting with, is that like those skills don't matter as much. But practically, like on the ground in the jobs that a lot of students are aiming for, like universities for a lot of things, but more jobs require a degree now. And so students naturally will want to get that degree to get that job. Well, those jobs, they want those skills that those interdisciplinary professors you were talking about are actually teaching. It's hard to fight against that dominant narrative, that dominant culture, even if the reality is different.
I would absolutely agree. And I would add that it's even within departments. So in nursing, I teach pathophysiology, pharmacology, adult med surg. It's all these very elaborate sounding and like technical sounding classes. And there is a stigma between the people who teach that and community health. And we've worked for years to break that down. So now when I teach, actually I'm on sabbatical this semester, but we're teaching the pharmacology of GLP-1 drugs, so the Ozempic, stuff like that. And it's the first time it's ever been taught, so it's not in the textbooks and all that kind of jazz yet. But we're teaching it not from the perspective of just what's this med and how do we know what it does, right? We're teaching it from the cultural phenomena perspective. Because without that knowledge of what are people going out there and getting these medications for and how are they using them, as opposed to just what does it say in the drug guide, right? It doesn't give you the whole complete picture. When we teach fentanyl, we don't just teach that I'm going to make everybody cringe and you're not going to want me back. We teach not just that this is a pain-relieving medication, but we teach the stories of the ER nurses as they're seeing patients who have overdosed come in. I have a guest lecturer from an addiction clinic come and spend time talking to us, my former student. So it's a whole variety of things. So what I would say about even the words like hard science and soft science feels very limiting and even kind of, like a bias and oppressiveness to it. So flipping that script, just telling your students, and as you apply for jobs, looking for a place that, if possible, fits your values. It might not be perfect when you start, but I experienced in my early career a lot of moral distress working with and for folks that their perspective on teaching or perspective on healthcare didn't really align with my values. And I almost left the teaching, almost left healthcare, all of that because of it. So that's a very big, long way of saying, what do we do about it? Well, I think the big piece of the discussion is, again, this interdiscipline, cross-discipline. Even going as a nursing professor to teach a music class, I applied to get my class in the core curriculum at the university, so anybody can take it no matter what year they are, and it's available once a year, that kind of thing. It's just nice to have something in there that's consistent. I had to really work on a discussion with the humanities faculty, and I got the feeling that some of that was because I was from the professional school. So a little bit of both, but we worked together. We were able to find some common ground, right? So instead of it being a very technical, okay, this week we're going to teach a DAW, and this week we're going to do this history, and this week we're going to write this project, I sort of loosened it up, and instead it says, this week we're having an interdisciplinary discussion on the culture of Japan and the US with video game composers, and things like that. So again, I think a common language, a conversation with just, getting people to authentically talk about what their interests are in the fields, that's a good first place to step. And as students, open mind, self-advocate for, I would love to do a project on this if you have any flexibility in your course methods. I know sometimes biology you don't, particularly in the lower division, but as you get more advanced in the upper division, work with your lab faculty. That's another big one. They love an interdisciplinary or cross-disciplines approach.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
And I will just say, as a very small aside, those sorts of statements happen, I think, in part because the people who deliver them are speaking, as we all do, a little bit from learned experience. And in their world, in their particular department, or in the line they walk, it might be that skill is more important, and they know it's more important, and they wish they had studied X more because that's a hard part of their job, so they're just trying to push that information forward. But what we have to remember as educators is if you have 30 people in your room, they're going to go in a lot of different directions. You're going to have some people who are working in the public sector. You're going to have some people who work in the private sector. You're going to have people who are entrepreneurs or people who prefer working in a large setting. And because people are going to take that information and go a lot of different directions, interdisciplinary and sort of these cross approaches, it's really the flexibility of that lesson plan is critically important, because that information, it needs to be useful to all 30 people. It's not, you can't make a lesson plan that is only useful for 5 of the 30 kids in your class. There's no point to do it. And you'll find out, at your teacher evals at the end of the semester that this was not the way to go. I might think that, there's a certain importance to data structures and low level design for students who are going to try to develop games, because I know I have seen a lot of students make simple programming mistakes where they're again, not to get too technical, but their big O notation, like if you calculate how complex something they wrote is, like the data structure is very inefficient. It's doing a ton of unnecessary iterations. It's looping over the memory constantly. It's writing and reading a lot of stuff it doesn't need to. But I don't want to spend an extra 3 weeks making sure they get that right. I need to tell them this is important, and you need to go back, and maybe I can address that in your notes, but I've got to move on to this other thing because 90% of the class is not going to need that particular lesson. They can get that in a special topics class, or like a lot of programmers, they'll find it out in Stack Overflow in a couple years. That I've got to move on to this next thing because this is important for everybody, and that's okay. It's all right to recognize that someone who's telling you that you need to focus on these specific things, or you need to get into the weeds about something, is just speaking usually from the standpoint of, I wish I had done this, or I wish I had known that, from their own, what they took from the class when they did it, or when they taught it, and what they wish they had when they were going through their individual path down a field. And you are sending a bunch of people running out. Some are going to go in the meadows, some are going to jump in the lake, some are going to hijack a Zeppelin. You don't know. So you have to kind of be prepared for the fact that your lesson's going to be carried in a lot of different directions.
Agreed. Do you do, we call them student hours? This like open office time or open online class time where students can come just ask questions or chat or whatever?
I have a Discord. And
that's awesome.
For all the good and bad that comes with that,
right.
My life is open office hours.
Yeah.
I will get the most inane questions, and the first thing I have to do is go, that's a really good question, Genova XX420. I'm pretty sure you're in one of my classes, but can you email me from your student account first so I know I can respond to this?
That's hilarious.
Because student privacy laws, like, I can't. It's a great question. Can you just copy paste it in an email, and then I can actually respond? So modern technology makes, especially for those of us who teach asynchronously online, your life is open office hours. Yeah. That's why I mentioned earlier, like, I have to fight really hard to get the students to talk amongst themselves, because asynchronous online classes, not only are they not in the same room, they're not taking the class at the same time or the same way or in the same, there's so much variance between the way they consume that now. Like, you have to find ways to create that.
Yeah. We've run into that a lot too. Our summer classes, so I'm teaching my video game music class now for the second time, but it's going to be in the summer, and it's condensed. Also, it's in the afternoons. Also, it's synchronous. No worries. You can do that, right? It's fine? You can take 15 weeks and put it in 6 and totally change everything about it. Okay, good. And it was like, sure, I'll be happy to do that, right? But one of the big challenges is, again, the technology, and then sort of my ethical perspective on having cameras required or not cameras, and how do we engage and all this kind of stuff. And it has just a multi-layers of challenges. And I do online open hour student hours through our LMS, because it has the ability to do that, where you can just mute and put a come join, but students aren't huge fans of that, right? And so we work out other ways to do it. If they live locally and stuff, I have an office on campus. I'm lucky that way, so they can come meet me there for office hours. For nursing students, they almost entirely refuse to use online office hours, I feel like, and so they all want to come see me in my office and have those continued discussions on public health and the impact of this, that, or the other thing, and how that affects their discipline.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was teaching when that thing in 2020 happened, and that was a trip. That semester, I mean, the class, we nominally learned things, but basically it was just a support network for each other. We were still barely in person before we were told, all right, it just needs to go online, and everyone started from square zero to figure out how to do that. But it was sort of an interesting time when I was considering, what teaching meant, because the future semesters, it was kind of normal asynchronous, but that class where we sort of were like almost therapists for each other of like, what's the world going to look like? Are my parents going to be okay? Will I be able to go home? That meant that semester when we finished going online, we had like some of the best discussion possible because everyone really knew each other. We were all sort of pulled together to, make sure that our mental states were intact. It was hard to replicate it after that. When students meet each other, I say meet each other for the first time on a synchronous or asynchronous course, it's so different. I'm not going to say that it's worse in every way because that's not charitable to a method of instruction that's becoming increasingly common. But I will say it radically changes the nature of the classroom. Now, there were some interesting things I could do with multimedia that I couldn't do just with like a PowerPoint, you know. But as someone who really does think of his classroom as a community, right? As someone who wants to be a peer in the classroom and be there as student teacher kind of hybrid. It took a lot of getting used to. I won't say that it was satisfying to me in a lot of ways because there were definitely moments where I would ask a student a question and the mic was muted and a couple seconds later it would come on and like a seagull would cry in the back and I'm like, you're not in your bedroom. And like nothing against that. I probably would also take my class on the beach in Florida if I could. Right. But, in terms of like managing kind of a cohesive, constructive classroom environment, I mean, I would struggle to call it a classroom if we sat down and like had a workshop on how do you define like a college classroom. I think it doesn't meet a lot of those criteria.
Yeah, it's challenging. Good stuff. That took us a lot of places, but I really liked it. Who's got one now? Right here. Yes.
Is there a way that you are able to accommodate people who may not have resources to do all of this online stuff? From my own experience, I have older computer systems and stuff and couldn't afford or retire and things. My phone doesn't update past 12. Back when I was in school for this college, I had Blackboard, which my PC did not like to access. I see that you have the hybrid ones, but you are almost entirely online. So is there some kind of accommodation you make or like teaching around just in case someone has either a technological difference, a difficulty that are maybe needing to work full time and go to school full time, that sort of thing? What do you guys do in that
Do you want me to?
It was cool if I start this one?
Yeah, go.
Cool. So this really speaks to me because I work with both 18 to 21-year-old traditional straight out of high school students. About half of our population comes from privilege and can afford the full price of a humanities and professional discipline education. And then the other half is almost entirely 100% on scholarship. A good majority of them are first-time attendees to college, and they don't have resources. And then we have what we call the transfer group who comes as well. And they are the ones that are adult learners returning to school, most of them with the intent of becoming a nurse for the remainder of their professional career. A lot of them are in their 30s and 40s when they come back for a BSN degree. And there isn't currently a requirement that you have to have another like bachelor's degree, but most of them have either an associate's or a bachelor's degree. And sometimes I have master's students too. So it's a huge variety of students and the materials they bring and their accessibility. So what I do for that is I think about what is sort of a base layer that we can all access? And the answer is typically you can watch videos somewhere, right? You can get to YouTube or something like that. The university requires you to be able to have access to the LMS device that we use, that's a university requirement. Okay, so we use something called, thank you. We use something called Moodle. I recommend not that one. But it is a mobile app. And it has a computer base. So if you can access a computer even at your local library, right? Put headphones in. You can watch my lecture. All I ask is that my students just connect with me before or near the start of the term, and we can work those things out. So I always record. My partner, Jeremy, is recording us today. He is our co-owner of thank you. He's our co-owner of our small business, Pixel Pond, and a videographer, cinematographer. And he taught my DAW class and PC gaming class because I was a console gamer mostly. And I don't use DAWs. Come to our panel tonight, hear about that. So it was an interesting way of bringing things together, people with different levels of experience and access to technology. So we got free DAW software and university loaned laptops, for that. So most colleges, I think, have a level where you can access a borrowed device. You can check it out. Or you can use your tuition and scholarship money if you can access that, or financial aid money. For the traditional students, right, that 18 to 21-year-old, they can usually access some of that through like the bookstore to get the supplies they need, or a laptop. The other thing I do in my classes, we talked about this just briefly, I don't require a lot of textbooks, which is a huge shift in the culture. You're welcome. I always try to make my music class free textbooks, free software. The Humanities department that I'm working with had a different opinion on that, so we're working on it. But my book for the summer's coming from Limited Run. Go see Brian Clark when he presents. It's his book. There you go. There you go. So that's a big benefit there, is to be able to kind of use that stuff. So if you can watch a video, you can come to my class. That's how that works pretty much, man.
Yeah. And I will just throw in, because you mentioned the word accessibility, and it reminded me, one of the things I do in my non-academic career is I'm an accessibility specialist for a very large company, and so producing VPATs, making sure software is WCAG 2.2 compliant and meets Section 508 standards. If you go through your course and you make it accessible, and I mean like checking your PDFs and your Word documents to make sure that they are screen reader compatible, and going through all of your audiovisual presentations and making sure they have alt text, and there's a laundry list of these things. All of the guidelines are available online. If you do any public sector work, it's critically important you're familiar with them, and it's starting to become more important in the private sector. We got a thing where last year the state of Colorado was like, we've had this thing on the books for a while that if your public-facing website is not accessible, you're supposed to get in trouble, finger wag. And they decided in 2024 of the year, it's like, get in trouble, finger wag isn't working. How about a $100,000 fine? Oh my gosh. Wow. And you would be amazed how quickly the public sector's like, we need accessibility specialists. We need people. Like, I was working day and night for some stuff to make sure that they met all of their legal and optional requirements. They were scared enough to no, go ahead and do the extra stuff too. Just make sure that when they go to test us with JAWS or NVDA, that our website works the way it's supposed to work. If you do that for your course, you're doing a chunk of the work already, because a lot of the accessibility is also making sure that it's available in low bandwidth situations, or it's available in formats that are going to be more easily consumed or consumed at lower tech levels. So you're going to kind of be, why do I keep going back to kill? Like two birds with one stone. You're going to be simultaneously making your course more accessible, but you're also going to be making it more financially accessible. In the same time that you're going to be helping people with, perception issues or other sensory,
Yeah, and I guess, the one thing I'll add is I think a lot of institutions are still not good at this. I think as many universities start to operate a little more like private businesses for a number of reasons that there's not time to get into now on this panel, they might start to look at their students/customer base and think about, to whom, to whom they need to provide services and how much they can afford to spend. I mean, ideally, you serve all students equitably, right? I think that should be common sense. But, you know, for people who make decisions, sometimes there are other calculuses at work.
There's a big challenge in nursing and healthcare about language around our patients. When I first started being a nurse, it was always, this is your patient, this is my patient. And for a while it was, it's the client. And now some of my current students who are moving forth from graduation are going, it's the customer. And I said, not in my classroom. But I mean, in general, though, there is a discussion around how folks are interfacing with higher ed and even K through 12 as well. A value-based. And I think that's the important part of our presentation is like, what is the value and how to sort of showcase that for our students. I truly wouldn't be a teacher today without my music degree. That was what taught me how to teach, was going to music classes, performance, you know, and all of those things. And I'm privileged and lucky to have had the exposure to excellent teachers that spent the time to help guide me through it a bit, right? So. Cool. All right, we got time left for one more. Oh my gosh. Okay.
And if we don't answer them,
yeah,
we can talk after the panel.
Yeah, we'll be around for sure. For sure. I think I saw right here.
Sure. So they're kind of two related questions and probably can be answered in conjunction. But I was wondering if you had any experience with pedagogical challenges teaching a humanities subject versus a STEM subject. And when you're teaching an interdisciplinary subject with students coming from different backgrounds, how do you make sure to level the playing field, but also make sure that each student is getting the most out of the course that they can?
Good stuff. May I start brief? So mine's very short. A student survey. It's an inventory, right, of where they're at. That's how I learned that my music students didn't know how to read music, except for two of them. And I'm wrong. We had one who used DAWs, and when Jeremy came to teach, he was able to work with this student one-on-one to be able to take the learning deeper. Everybody else had never touched a DAW, including me. So that was an interesting day, right? So a student survey where you ask them to share their interests, their comfort level, okay? And then their knowledge basis, even if it's just a Likert scale, like rate, you know, that works well sometimes for my more STEM-based students than the humanities-based ones. And take it through the topics. And to be honest, make it required, give a couple of points to it so they do it, and then take that information and make notes about the students themselves. Now, I have a class of 30 students. If you have 300, right, in a public institution, Alex is 300, right, it's different. But you can still gauge where they're at based on themes, right? You can take all that stuff, and I hate to say it, but you can dump it into some software that summarizes it, right, and gives you the themes. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I think that'll give you an idea.
Yeah, and so I'll just say on my first day of class to help kind of get students from wherever they're coming from into, you know, the lane that I want them in, I don't even talk about course content really. I also don't do syllabus day because if they're not going to read it, they're probably not going to pay attention to it. So I just talk about what's something topical. Nice. You know, when I first started, it was autonomous vehicles. They were coming. They were around the corner. They were stuck at the corner because the autonomous system's not very good, but they're going to come around the corner someday. And so we just talked about like, okay, what are the stakes of like autonomous vehicles hitting the road? I did a show of hands. Who would like a self-driving car? Who would never want a self-driving car, right? Yes. And then maybe class 2, I'd start weaving in course concepts and kind of see where people are. It takes a little bit of effort to kind of get people to buy in, but once they do, if you're teaching something they already know, they might accept like, oh, actually, hey, I already knew that, like I understand that. And then when you get to something they don't know, because they buy in because of the topic area, it feels relevant to them, they might give you a little leniency if it's something really tough they have to wrestle with, and they also might give you some leniency if it's something that's not interesting to them because they already have learned it.
Yeah. And in my case, because I do game design specifically, there's already some amount of interdisciplinary nature to it just because it's a very multimedia thing and lots of people with lots of different backgrounds all kind of want to converge on this one technology. So I start with an orientation quiz. The first week of my class is very light. It's a lot of open discussion. But then there is a quiz that's sort of get a focus of where the student is. That then leads into a series of reflections, which is, I talked about that 90s bulletin board style thing. It's taking them from the thinking about what they want to study and how they want to study it into discussing the things they want to study. And the secret nefarious purpose for all of this is by the midpoint of the semester, they've all been talking amongst each other and coming up with game ideas. And then when I spring, all right, the second half of the semester is a group project, about 75% of the groups are already made because I have groups of people with like commingled interests or design thoughts who have already been plotting games or thinking about stuff they want to do. So when it comes time to make groups, I'm like, okay, I've got maybe 8 of my 30 students I've got to weave into 2 groups. The rest of them are already set up because they have naturally kind of steered into that through a combination of the way the asynchronous course is designed by forcing that communication. Again, seriously, points work, award points, you know. But fostering that communication and knowing from the get-go how those students are going to either self-sort or need to be sorted in the event that you have to do it.
That's great. Cool. We're going to wrap it up. Come up and see us after. Stay in touch. I'm happy to, I have a handful of business cards, and you can catch either me or Jeremy at this email here on my card. Did you bring cards or anything?
I don't have cards, but I can share my LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. He's cool. and catch Daniel tomorrow at his panel too.
Yeah,
talk about that,
yeah,
maybe?
sure. So at 11:30 a.m. tomorrow, I'm going to be joined by 2 fellow members of my Winter on Game Studios cast.
Yeah.
We're talking about Going Green, Games to the Planet, how 90s kids raised on environmentalism media have translated that into modern games, focused on, you know, different design plans for saving the planet.
Awesome. Cool. So thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you very
Awesome.
much.